Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is ostensibly and primarily, apparently, a distinguished bureaucrat, but he is much more. He's that rare bureaucrat with a sense of humor, with a creative, scholarly accomplishment that is unique and rare in his profession, perhaps. He's authored more than half a dozen books of poems in Hindi and English, a novel, a collection of short stories, a treatise on science and spirituality, a collection of essays, Bureaucrazy. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Maharaj Krishen Kaw. Welcome.
Thank you.
You are, let's start with your primary incarnation, shall I say, of the many, Secretary, Ministry of Human Resource Development, looking at education. Isn't it frustrating for you that India spends so little on education compared to the rest of the world? Or rest of the sort of, shall we say, developed world,
Well,
developing
it is true.
world?
It is true that we are spending almost 3.6% of our GDP on education, which is very low. The Kothari Commission had said in 1966 that it should be 6%. And ever since I have come into this field of activity, I have been pressurizing the government to raise the amounts. And you will be glad to know that this year we were able to get a 25% jump in our outlay. Last year we got 4,400 crores. This year it is 5,500, and so it's quite.
You know, you're a man of letters, of ideas and philosophy. Doesn't this frustrate you? Why do you think that issues such as education haven't been sufficiently on the national agenda? Why is it that during elections we aren't really talking about the issue of education?
I think somehow there is a misconception that education is in the category of social services. If you see the Planning Commission's classification of various services in the economy, there are economic services and there are social services. And economists have generally felt traditionally that economic services add to wealth, whereas social services are merely some add-ons which you give to people as a sort of dole. But recently, even economists have realized that investment in human resources are really which drives a country in its development process. And the East Asian miracle, for example, is ascribed to basic education and its aftermath. So I think even in India that realization is growing, especially after Amartya Sen gave his call for greater spending. So we have been using his name and other names and trying to sensitize the government. And I think there is more sensitivity now.
Isn't it also an issue that it's not just how much we spend on education, but how effectively and how well we're able to spend that money?
Very true.
And in this sort of environment of looking at disinvestment largely because of inefficiency of you know, the role that the government plays, you know, what mechanisms are you looking at to try and work?
There are two ways of looking at the whole problem. One is to try to make the rupee go farther in government investments, which is one area which we are attacking. And there it is the management of education which has to be attacked. And one of the major things we have done recently is to try to request the state governments to pass on this work of primary education especially to the Panchayati Raj institutions or to village education committees. And we have succeeded quite a bit in this. Now we feel that this will be a revolution in basic education, because once the local villagers themselves assume command of the educational system, they appoint the teachers, they pay their salaries, and then they are also their local boss, so to say. They can, you know, dismiss them if they wish to. And many of the teachers are local boys or local girls. So we feel that this will totally change the face of basic education in this country. And the other thing we are trying to do is to promote public-private cooperation. That is, we want to use the services of the private sector as much as we can.
You have also been working largely as an extension of your own personal explorations in the area of values in education. Do you think that values can really just be taught because they are institutionalized, or their teaching in some ways is institutionalized, or it becomes a form of curricula? How do we go about inculcating values
I
the
think
education
values have to be inculcated in both the ways. You see, firstly, if you go to the source of everything, unless the philosophy of life changes, values cannot change. I feel that values which are divorced from a basic philosophy of living are just ineffectual values. They don't have a strong foundation. And that is why I feel no ethics and no morality can be without spirituality. And spirituality is basic, that is fundamental. And therefore I am attacking the problem from its roots by saying to the Indian Council of Philosophical Research that we must have a center for consciousness under their tutelage. Now, what this Center for Consciousness is going to do is to provide the philosophical underpinning for a value education system. And the basic thing you need in a value education system is to create modern scientific values which will be universal in their scope, which cannot be related to a single sect or religion, which are totally universal. Now, I have found, for example, that Aurobindo's hypothesis of integral yoga provides a framework which is very satisfying, because he tells you that there is a certain movement in the evolutionary process where you move from, firstly, God involves himself in matter, and then matter evolves itself into God. Now, this is a process of, you have done that serial on Sri Ramakrishna. Now, you have seen Ramakrishna also says, God first involves himself in matter, and matter then evolves itself into God. Now, if the process of biological evolution is taken only as a small segment of this entire process of divinity unfolding and manifesting itself at higher and higher levels of living beings, then the whole thing becomes very interesting and understandable. Then you understand that from the amoeba we have come to the animal, and from animal we have come to human being, and where do we go from here? Then the spiritual progress which human beings are supposed to pursue is a progress from unconsciousness to subconsciousness to uniconsciousness to consciousness to superconsciousness. So if human beings understand that the goal of life is to pursue superconsciousness, then morality falls in its natural place. Then you don't have to teach morality, because if you have to have a higher level of awareness, you must have morality. Morality is basic.
But how do we sort of transfer this, shall we say, this
transfer
insight into the classroom?
Yes, we transfer it in two ways. I don't agree with those people who say that direct instruction is not to be pursued. I think we must have once or twice in a week, there should be direct instruction in morality, spiritual and other values. It must be given. You can start in the lower classes by poems, by short stories, and by parables, by puppet shows and things like that, which make it very interesting. And you can just give stories from the epics, which are known almost everybody in India, and create the quest for values starts from there. But in the higher classes, I think when you come to say class 8 or so, you can even tell them straight away that these are the lives of great people. These are the messages they gave. Show them how the message of Christ is the same as the message of Krishna, and so on and so forth. So comparative religion can also be presented in the classroom. That is one aspect. The other aspect is that it must form part of every subject. Now I will give you a very simple illustration. You are teaching mathematics. Arithmetic is to be taught. Now in the traditional classroom we have been saying, if somebody, some shopkeeper gives you short weight by half a say gram or something,
right.
then if he does so much of weighing, how much will he earn out of this short weighing? Now there is an implicit value you are teaching to the children, that short weighing is something which leads to profits and is a desirable thing. Whereas what the Satyasai Institute, for example, does in a similar situation, they say if a child gives a donation or a gift to a beggar or to a deserving person of so much per day, how much will he spend in a month? So immediately you are putting the child on a totally different track, that giving something to the needy is a desirable thing. So in every subject, whether you are reading history or geography or mathematics or chemistry or physics, you can always teach values.
To what degree can the state this has been an issue about doctoring textbooks and inculcating values in education, and then the question is asked, what values? Are these necessarily, implicitly universal values? To what degree do you feel it is legitimate for the institution that structured the state? You spoke about Aurobindo and his philosophy, and I think there are many people who would agree that this is in many ways a universal philosophy. And historically there have been many attempts to evolve this sort of universal idea and religion perhaps even. But implicitly, the minute it has a tag that it derives from Aurobindo, in the secular agenda, the secular arena, it becomes suspect. So how mindful are you of this
My
great
solution
challenge?
to this problem is what I said in 1983 in the book called The Science of Spirituality, which you mentioned. Now there my thesis is that all religions are actually saying the same thing. But our problem is that when we talk of Christ said this, and Jesus, so and so, Muhammad said this, and Krishna said this, it gets a tag. Now we must develop a textbook, and that's what I tried to do in that book. I created a textbook which did not mention anybody's name. It merely said, what is the nature of the total? I didn't refer to God or Allah or anything. I said there is a thing called total. Now what is the nature of total? So I speculated based on all the philosophies that have come, whatever appealed to my mind. I said this seems to be the nature of the total. Now what is the nature of the individual? What is the relationship between the individual and the total? Now these are all scientific methods of looking at the whole problem. You are not saying do this ritual, worship this fellow. We are not saying that at all. We are talking of what is an individual, what is a total, what is the relationship, how should two individuals react with each other, interact with each other, all that sort of thing. Now, I think it is possible if all of us put our minds together to build a universal philosophy.
Here's someone who's been through the different layers of the bureaucracy, talking about spirituality, talking about values, talking about a whole vocabulary which seems somewhat alien to what we traditionally associate with the bureaucracy. What has prompted you to remain a bureaucrat and sort of have this simultaneous label perhaps and all that goes with it coexist?
Initially when I joined the service, it was out of a normal desire to have a career, and at that time the Indian Administrative Service was considered to be a good career. But as I have grown in the service, I find that there is tremendous opportunity for doing good things to the country. It is in fact a very unique place. The Indian Administrative Service is a very unique place because you have all the powers, and if you are the right person and you have the right attitude, and if you meet people, if you give them hearing, if you render justice to people, and if you are equitable and objective in your conduct, in the entire area which is under your jurisdiction, you are at least making that corner of the country cleaner, a better place. So that's worth doing.
Have you felt your sort of sensibilities sometimes assaulted, compromised in your role and in your functions? You make the sound as if this is a wonderful, empowering opportunity, which I'm sure it is, but it must have its downsides too.
It is an empowering opportunity, but you don't have degrees of freedom to the extent that one would wish to have. There are so many things which hamper your full initiative.
Do you feel
are part of a system.
Do you feel your sense of humor has enabled you to sort of survive much of this? I was going
I
through
think
your essays and bureaucracy.
I have survived because of my interest in literature and in spirituality. These two things have made me, because whenever I felt frustrated, I let go in a piece which I later collected in bureaucracy, or I wrote a poem or something, and or went for a walk, and that has led there. But I have been at the receiving end of what you are talking about, and I have not survived in some jobs for obvious reasons, because I did not toe the line. But I don't mind it, because it's a part of, there are occupational hazards in every career, and in this career we have the occupational hazard of having to deal with various kinds of pressures, and sometimes if you don't succumb to them, you pay the price. So I'm always ready to pay the price, and I have paid the price. So it doesn't really matter.
In bureaucracy, you talk about the 7 or is it 6 different kinds of bureaucrats. Which
Yeah, yeah.
category would you place yourself?
The last one, the beast of burden. I believe in working very hard, and I have lampooned myself as having said that the beast of burden, his light is the last to go out in the secretariat, and he always suffers from the indispensability complex. I had the same theme in my novel, Asman Nahi Girte, in which I again lampooned the bureaucrat by saying, I'm not giving you the exact words because I don't remember them, but it's something like this, कि हजारों साल पहले एटलस ने सोचा था कि आसमान मेरे कंधों पर टिका है, मैं हिल जाऊंगा तो आसमान गिर जाएगा. कितना गलत था वो, आसमान नहीं गिरते. बहुत एटलस आए और गए, आसमान नहीं गिरे, आसमान कभी नहीं गिरते. So we do suffer from this kind of an indispensability complex that we are, very important to the system. But in the final analysis, you are only one of the many. But if you can make some difference to the system, I think it's worth it.
You played a key role in the formulation of the pay commission recommendations. And at one time, certainly, the community's response outside the bureaucracy was extremely enthused by the idea that this included elements of trimming the bureaucracy, making them work a little harder, be somewhat more accountable, and yet we felt that in their implementation, many of these accountability aspects, productivity aspects were diluted.
Yes.
And it was really more the lollies that went to the bureaucrat.
Very true.
Did you feel frustrated?
No.
On the
I have not felt frustrated for the simple reason that I believe that all ideas have a life of their own. I have planted the ideas in the soil now, and one day or the other they will fructify, and they are fructifying from time to time. So I'm not at all dispirited because everything comes in its own time. For example, I have given there this idea that we should have a performance-related increment. My idea was that India is possibly not yet ready for performance-related pay. In other countries, the pay of an officer is determined every year afresh, depending on his performance last year. So I thought that was too drastic for a country like India because we may not be so objective as a people to be able to fine-tune this kind of remuneration. So I said, okay, give them at least this much, that at the end of the year, they can give a 0 increment or 1 increment or 2 increments. Only this much freedom I wanted to have. Even this the government has not yet been able to accept. So you can see that the system is not yet ready to accept many of the innovative ideas. But I'm sure as we go along, for example, I said downsize by 30%, starting from the IAS. You will be happy to know that we used to have more than 100 people recruited every year to the IAS. Today it has come down to 50. So I think at least some recommendations are
how
getting
popular did that make you with your colleagues?
Well, I didn't do it for the sake of popularity. I mean, it was done because I felt like this.
Did you feel that there were, in evolving policies, there are inevitably pressures and pulls and counter-pressures and counter-pulls? What were some of the sort of pressures that you felt? Were they overt, covert, implicit?
For the pay commission?
Yes.
No, I resisted most of the pressures. But this much I can say that at one stage government service had become so low paying that people were just not prepared to go into government service. That would have been a tragedy. I think I have done at least one contribution I have made. I have made the government servant's job a little more dignified than it was in the interregnum. Now, I have also done another thing. I have made him too expensive to be afforded by the government in large numbers. So I think the logic of the situation will show in a decade or so that governments, especially state governments, will be forced to retrench people, whether they like it or not. They just won't have the resources to afford them.
In our
So
conversation,
downsizing will follow.
in our conversation, I sense this sort of an attitude of both activism, to be that you're someone who's proactive and yet you surrender to the processes and unfolding of life. I was also interested that you have done a course in astrology that you have completed. You write about the science of spirituality. Has astrology sort of played a role in this aspect of your acceptance of surrender, of the unfolding of life?
Actually, all this is a single piece. If you look at all these occult sciences, they are of a piece with each other. And one very profound remark of the mother, which I would like to share with you and the listeners, is that she says that if you can manage contradictions in life, apparent contradictions. Now, one of the most apparent contradictions in life is that you have to accept that everything that happens in this world happens by divine will. You have to believe in this totally, that everything that is happening in this world is happening by divine will. And it cannot be otherwise, because there is only the divine and nothing else. So it is only the divine manifesting itself. So how can anything be outside the divine will? At the same time, this seemingly contradictory approach that you as an individual will do your utmost to achieve certain objectives which you have placed before yourself as something desirable. Now both these objectives seem totally contradictory, because if you are trying to achieve, then how can everything be divinely ordained? But she says these are both simultaneously true. And the day you see the simultaneous truth of these contradictory things, then you have started glimpsing the real nature of, the reality.
How active a role does sort of astrology play in your life?
In my life,
Yes.
I believe in it. I believe in it. For example, my son is to be married, so I insist that the horoscope should be matched before I would like him to get
Believing
married.
in it is
But I would not go so far as to say in the morning, if I am going to office, to consult whether it is auspicious for me to step out. I think that is overdoing it. But certainly in the large decisions of life, we must be guided by astrology.
What for you, in your sort of understanding and articulation of it, the scientific basis
Of astrology? Well, I have tried to do my own analysis, which is not there in the books. I think that the configuration of stars at the time of your birth has some linear relationship with two things. One, your genetic makeup, and the other is your karmic residue. So I think these three are in some way connected with each other. Now, you can ask me how are they? I mean, what is the modality? I would not be able to explain. But I think that if the theory of karma is correct, and I believe it to be correct, then genes have to be determined by karma. And if astrology is correct, then the location of stars, the configuration of stars has to be connected with that. So all three must have a relationship with each other. That is the analytical relation which I draw.
Given this aspect of the operation of karma, which is seen certainly in the Buddhist context as being a fairly sort of impersonal philosophy of causality. There's a cause and effect. We perform actions, it leaves karmic imprints. As you say, it modifies our genetic what have you in our next incarnation. Where then is the role for divinity in this worldview?
Grace. The divine being the immanent as well as the transcendental reality in this whole show. Because basically I believe that life is nothing but a drama. You see, you and I are both divine. You are pretending to be an interviewer, and I am pretending to be the interviewee, and the listeners are pretending to watch both of us. But actually we are all, it is the divine talking to itself and listening to itself and enjoying the show and enjoying the fun. So really speaking, there is nothing except the divine. the real truth, the highest truth, I think, is that there is nothing except the divine. And we are only particles of divinity playing this drama, which is an eternal drama in my view, which will never end.
Is it in your sort of philosophical worldview, practical, possible, reasonable, feasible, for a person to be a good, altruistic, compassionate human being without a sense of the divine, without a sense of divinity as is, commonly understood and experienced?
Well, there are some people who say that they are humanistic or humane, although they don't believe in God, but they believe in something. For example, I have a brother-in-law who said about 10 years back that he doesn't believe in God. I said, what do you believe in? He said, I believe in truth. I said, Gandhi has said, truth is God. Now, it's only a definitional problem. If you accept that truth is God, it's okay. So, I don't think people who say that they don't believe in God or they don't believe in, their problem is that of semantics. It is not of reality. Because if they say, I believe in myself, what is that myself that they are talking about? That self itself is only divinity. And who is telling them what is right and what is wrong? Their inner consciousness. And what is that inner consciousness? Who is that witness in them? It's nothing but divinity.
In your life, sort of, your striving in the arena of life, as in your actions and your work, your spiritual strivings have both been parallel and have merged with one another. Our scriptures and traditions say there is a time when that field of action, shall we say, sort of tends to diminish somewhat, and the field of the internal universe begins to express itself and be much more active. Before that happens, in this field of action, what sort of challenges, tasks, roles, ambition, I don't mean ambition in the narrow contemporary sense of it, do you have for yourself?
Well, as far as work is concerned, I don't think I will stop working till I die. I don't visualize a stage of my life when I will take sannyas or move away from work into inactivity and move entirely into the realm of the spirit and sort of meditate 24 hours. In fact, in this talk, The Art of Dynamic Equilibrium, which I am going to deliver day after tomorrow in a meeting, my thesis is that we cannot remain inebriated in bliss 24 hours. I mean, that may be individual happiness or bliss. And as you know, Ramakrishna told Vivekananda, fie upon you. Are you looking on your individual salvation when there is the whole of humanity waiting to be helped? So I don't think, and salvation into what, Rajiv? Suppose I say I want moksha. In fact, my definition of moksha is very different from the traditional one. If we say that I want moksha, who is this I who wants moksha? And from what does he want moksha? I think all this, excuse my saying, so this nonsense about birth and rebirth being something bad and our wanting to get out of this whole
cycle,
I think that is wrong. We are going against the divinity. The divinity wants the drama to proceed. He is the director of the show. You and I are actors. Now suppose we say, okay, we are off and we won't play. The drama will come to a close. That's not what he wants.
Well, I'm afraid this drama has to conclude. Thank you very much, sir. This has been a great privilege.
Thank you.